going to move on to books 9 to 12 today. I do want to say a little bit about something about the preceding books that I had not really dealt with. I think mostly I dealt with book 5. And we just arrived on the land of the island of the Phaiakians, Scheria, Scheria. And when we get to that place, which is a sort of in-between place, they're demigods. We saw that it's sort of a halfway house between the supernatural realm, where the gods reside, and the realm of men. And it's a place where Odysseus starts to be reborn, as it were, and recover a sense of his own identity, which he'd lost. Remember, when we met him in book 5, he was hidden from the world by Calypso. He'd lost a sense of himself. Again, I don't know if this is a reflection on what suffering does to a person, but I do think there's something in that. And you will know that if you've even had a toothache. All you can think about is your pain. You don't really think about much else. And the greater the suffering and the longer it goes on, the more it marks you as a person. Odysseus is a man who has suffered a great deal, and this is one of the things that makes him an interesting character, is precisely that quality and the degree of suffering he undergoes. And it's very closely tied to his wisdom. Remember, the goddess who looks after him, Athena, is the goddess of wisdom. There's something being said about the connection between wisdom and suffering, which Scripture also speaks to. That the suffering of this life is insignificant compared to the weight of glory that we will one day behold, Paul says. In Odysseus' case, it's part of his identity, and it's being taught. Remember, this book is not just telling a story to the Greeks. It's being used in some ways. It's inculcating wisdom in his audience, and they're saying something about becoming a wise person and undergoing suffering. Doesn't have the Christian eschatological sense of the purpose in looking at the man of sorrows, Jesus, and how he is the exemplar of wisdom, but also of suffering. There's no claim being made here that Odysseus' suffering is in some way redemptive for all of humanity, but there is still a sense of the meaning of suffering in his life as a man who represents wisdom. We'll come to the encounter between Athena and Odysseus later on, where they actually confront one another as a sort of she tries to deceive him, he tries to deceive her. She's going to win that contest, of course, but they both characteristically try to trick the other person, which moves away from the normal path of wisdom and now moves into something like deceit. But we're going to see that deceit is characteristic of the Greek concept of wisdom. Penelope deceived, Calypso deceived, Circe will deceive, Odysseus will deceive. So not telling the truth. So truth and wisdom are sort of parting ways there. Christians are going to have problems with that. So I don't mean to suggest that there's across-the-board compatibility there. All the same, so he's on the island of the Phaiakians, and he encounters this young princess, Nausicaa, and she takes him back to her father's palace and introduces him to various of the courtiers, the nobility there, and he retells his tales. So there's a story within the story there, and books 9 to 12 is the story of Odysseus' wanderings. So the things we associate with Odysseus, the wanderings are primarily right there in the middle chapter. So it's like a microcosm of the whole book. Whenever you use the word microcosm, you counterpart in mind, which is a macrocosm. So this is a little version of that. And the Greek mind tended to work this way. It thought that things were interconnected in that way. So what you could say about this thing could be explained in terms of other things, because everything was connected to everything else. Modern physics tends to dispute that idea. It sees discrete objects not connected and so forth. The Greeks' way of looking at things was very much everything is made out of 4 basic elements: earth, air, fire, and water. And what you could say about a person was also true of what you would say about a city. Plato will depend on that in his work, The Republic, which we'll look at in a little bit. But so the concept of justice would be compatible and comparable for an individual as well as for a whole city. So if I can't appeal to a identity group view of justice, which our contemporaries now talk about, right? Social justice, they talk about an identity group and think that it's different, and the standards are different there than they will be for this group or for an individual. There's a sense of a hierarchy of justice. They're not having any of that here. There's one standard of justice, and it holds true for an individual. It also holds true for a city. Having said that, that doesn't mean they're all expected to act the same way. There's a sense of distinction there between Nausicaa, the princess, and Odysseus, who is a man and also a supplicant, a stranger in need of assistance. He's supposed to act in a certain way. He's supposed to fall on his knees and grab her knees, pleading for her to help him. He decides not to do that because he's lost all his clothes, and that might suggest that he is trying to do something else rather than do what normally a man would be expected to do in that situation. So there's situational differences. All the same, the standard of justice is consistent throughout. And that's why it's, I think, helpful to us, is because it believes there is such a thing as a law of human nature, consistent. And when we say a law, it is actually held to be a law. It's true of all people. And it's that idea which, applied consistently by Christians, is what allows them to speak against things like slavery. To say that person who you call a slave is actually as much a person as you are, and therefore what you're doing is wrong. You're not treating that person as a human being, right? In the ancient world, they have this idea of a common human nature, but they just simply say, well, but that group of people who are slaves are not human beings anymore. They've lost that, as if it were something not integral to their nature. The Bible says rather differently on that. You can't murder them. You ought not to enslave them. There are certain things that a person has by virtue of the fact that they are human beings. They bear the image of God. The Greeks hold the idea of a law of human nature, but they don't apply it consistently. Christians will apply it consistently. So again, another difference. But these 4 books are a microcosm of the whole work. And what's interesting about them is that we see a whole series of stories in there. Now remember, back in the first lecture, I talked about how even the gods were talking about a story of Agamemnon, the king of the kings. Like there's a bunch of different kings, Agamemnon and Achilles and Odysseus and various others, going over there, and Agamemnon's the head honcho of them all. And he goes home and he is murdered by his wife and her adulterous lover. And then his son avenges him, and the gods talk about that story. It's an odd thing. Why are the immortals talking about that? It really bothers them that this should be the case. It seems unjust, and I think this is the real reason. It seems a grave injustice for somebody in a position like Agamemnon to be murdered in this way. And also by his wife, of course, even more heinous. And it justifies what the son does, which is to murder the murderers. But it's still murder. And this is, as I say, if you go to the tragedies, what the son does in avenging his father is still seen as wrong. That's really interesting. The gods approve of it because he was rectifying an injustice, but in the act of doing that, he committed another injustice. So they're trying to balance it out. They're struggling here with it, but it's clear that this upsets the gods. And now here's what's contradictory about it. If you read the account of the gods, which is not told in Homer, but will be told in, if you wanted to look later at some point, there's another epic poet by the name of Hesiod in the account called Theogony, of how the gods themselves rebelled against their fathers. So Zeus rebelled against Kronos, his father. The same way, like the same sort of thing that's going on here. Rebellion. So there's injustice in the gods, in other words. This is what Plato is going to object to. How can this be? These immortals are basically the chief representatives of injustice. Why should this can't be if they're gods? Not impossible. And so the gods here being upset that Agamemnon has been murdered by his wife and her adulterous consort seems a little bit rich, because that's what they've done. They've rebelled against the other gods. And there's this continual story of the rebellion against the gods, and even in what we read amongst the gods of Mount Olympus, they're committing adultery, they're lying, they're doing all sorts of scandalous things. So the gods seem like people. They're just immortal, but they're bad people that can't die. That's the objection that comes. And the objection is well-founded, in my opinion. But there is a law of human nature being asserted there, but again, it's not being significantly applied. So children don't have the status of human beings in the ancient world at all. A Roman father can kill his own children, and the law will allow him to do that. They don't become his heirs until he adopts them, by the way. There's a ceremony of adoption. His own children, his own natural children, but they're at risk until he says, this is my heir. At that point, when they've been adopted, then they have legal standing, and then they can't kill them without consequence, the state coming in. But as long as they're just children and haven't been adopted as such, their status is entirely at the whim of the father of the family. And the father can appoint some other person as his heir, which is what happens with Augustus, by the way. Julius Caesar adopts him as his heir. This is the man who was emperor when Christ was born, Caesar Augustus. He was he wasn't a natural son of Julius Caesar. He was his adopted into the Julii. Very historic and important family. At any rate, we have stories being told. That was the reason we got to that point. Stories being told right at the outset. Even amongst the gods, they're talking about what has happened to Agamemnon. And now Odysseus is going to hear the story about who? Agamemnon. And what happened to him when he goes to the Phaiakians. There's a singer there who is singing the story of the Greeks who left Troy and went back home. And as he hears the stories, he weeps, and he reveals himself by weeping. Alcinous, the king, notices that this is not a normal response to the story. You're reacting to this as if it really is hitting you personally, and of course it is. And so he asks him to tell his story. In response to the story, he tells his story. This is how stories work. Good stories bring us to connect or identify with what's going on in the story so that we're compelled by it. This is why we love stories, good stories. We identify with the characters in them. We either want to be like them, or we detest the characters, or we identify with the situation, but it's vividly portrayed, and it seems to connect with this, a common human nature. That's why the stories are effective. This is why the Odyssey will remain as good a story as it is, because it speaks to that common human nature. And it's not because we revere the Greeks, it's because the Greeks identified it and portrayed it very well. Likewise, Scripture, and even more so. The story of, I did the Bible as literature this morning, so the story of Abraham, or of Jacob, or Joseph, or Moses, they're compellingly told. Even more so with Jesus, they jump off the page. And the situations, let's say Jesus, the way he treats people who are outcasts, and the lepers, the sick. There's something about his actions which are the way we would like people to act, but nobody ever does. But he did. So there's something that is very realistic about the portrait, and then also something that is almost unbelievable. It's miraculous. People are astonished. They remain astonished. In a different way, I think the Odyssey works through the stories that way, and all stories work that way. This is the power of good literature. So when he hears the story about the heroes, Greek heroes from Troy, and how they've gone home, he weeps at the losses of his friends. Remember, he was in battle with them for 10 years. These are men who have fought side by side, and the bonds between men at war are famous. They weren't just workmates. They went through struggles together. They had to trust the guy beside them. Otherwise, they're getting a spear in the side. This man is somebody that you would trust your life to. And on the other hand, this is somebody that you would die for, who's beside you. That's the bond there. This is somebody who literally is risking his life to protect your life, and vice versa. It's going across the line. These are deep, deep bonds. When he hears that they go home and have been betrayed, Odysseus is devastated. Likewise, when he hears the story about himself in the story. Isn't that a funny old thing? Can you imagine? It's a legendary tale, because it is legendary. Now the Greek gods, demigods, the Phaiakians, are themselves hearing about the story about his friends who he knew intimately for 10 years in legendary terms. They're going on about how wonderful these characters were and what a tragedy. He would feel it amplified by how many times, and then he hears about himself, and the story doesn't have an end, and he breaks down. And what's interesting about it is, and I know that in psychology, narrative therapy is one of the techniques used there. By telling your own story or by hearing somebody's story, Alcoholics Anonymous works this way as well, by the way. People identify certain patterns that are consistent throughout all human experience, and that helps them deal with their suffering. There's a narrative of suffering and loss that allows them to recover from suffering and loss. It's part of the process. And one of the things that comes from suffering and loss is you feel detached from everybody. Just like I said with the toothache. If your tooth hurts, all you can think about is your tooth. The people around you, they're there speaking kind, what can I help you? But they can't really, they're not getting rid of the pain. You just know the pain. You know it intimately. You can't get your mind off of it. To some degree, that is what is happening here. So through story, there's a way of getting outside the thing that has come to dominate this man. Remember, we met him weeping on the beach. His will had not been broken, but in many ways he was a broken man. He wasn't going to accept this offer of immortality and all pleasures imaginable without his sense of everything that was good and right being rectified. That's why he is the hero. Like if this just happened to any old man, whatever, but this is the great Odysseus. This man exemplifies nobility. He's a better man than we are. This is what you have to realize. We have to look up to Odysseus to be affected by this. It's not just another war hero. This is a very good man. So the story that he tells helps him deal with the story that he's undertaken and endured. And Athena uses her arts to make him appear better even. He appears taller, he appears thicker, so more muscular. She makes him look better. He shines, he looks godlike. And there's an emotional, a sort of a catharsis. There's a suffering. They're purging the suffering and almost getting rid of the ways in which pain distorts us. Have you ever seen people who've had a hard life? Look at people at different ages. There's a genetic component to it for sure. But some people, you look at them and they've aged. And when you say they've aged, like they really have visibly aged. And what has made them age? Their suffering. It can be physical pain, or it can be emotional pain, or it can be both. And they wear that care on their cheeks. You can literally see it. She removes this from him temporarily. There's something being said, I think, symbolically there about how wisdom alleviates some of the suffering that comes with life. Wisdom itself is the antidote to suffering that without wisdom is meaningless and just dehumanizing. Remember, he washes up on the beach and he is naked, covered in salt. It's just a body, almost. And now he's recovering something of his essential self, and she's helping him with that. Wisdom, personified, Athena, is giving him back his true identity in this process. So in the same way that in books 1 to 4, Athena leads Telemachus to a better sense of who he is, likewise she does so that here with Odysseus. She's helping him recover what was lost before he goes back. So it's preparatory. Now note that, again, wisdom is doing this. Wisdom is preparing people, in this case a son and a father, how to overcome their obstacles in life, their challenges. For the audience, do you not need wisdom to help you live with the suffering in life? Do you not need that? Of course they do. So what we have here, and I want to say this, it won't matter so much now, it will matter later in the course. What we have is a technique called, I'll use the Greek word here, mimesis. And it just has to do with the representation of reality through poetry, through literature. And it's sort of like the microcosm, macrocosm. It assumes that what happened to Odysseus reflects what could happen to us as well. That's why it works. It's not just entertaining. It is therapeutic. And it's more than therapeutic. It's teaching us what life is and how to live it. Now, if you wanted to dig down, you could talk in terms of Jordan Peterson's The Archetypes of Human Experience, using Carl Jung's dream theory. He's encountered a dark side of experience and of life. Life's not a bowl of cherries. He's discovered that and that's what we all must undergo. I think that's true. That's an aspect of the law of human nature. And stories do that because our words reflect that truth about human nature. And it does very much speak against the perspectivalism of our days, in which we have identity groups and they seemingly have nothing in common. There's a native way of looking at things. There's a black way of looking at things. There's a woman's way of looking at things, whatever. Well, of course there isn't a way, but is it not common? Is there no common humanity there amongst those groups? If so, then why would I care what a woman's experience is? I'm not a woman. Why would I care what a black person's experience is? I'm not black. Why would I care what a native's is? I'm not native. Like, why would you care about any of that if there was nothing in common? It's the commonality that makes you care and should care. It's this idea of a common human nature. And the common human nature is going to make you feel it is unjust that somebody who bears that common nature is being treated differently just because they have superficial distinctives, right? So, he tells his tales. Any comments or questions at this point? I'm trying to give you an apologetic here, and I'm not doing it intentionally, but it comes sort of with the territory of why literature is a profoundly good way of understanding yourselves, more so than psychology. It's how humans communicate their most important truths. They tell stories. Jesus told stories as a means of teaching. And the Bible itself is a work of literature. It's more than a work of literature, but it is a work of literature. So he tells his tale. They say, who are you? And tell us your story. And so he tells their story. In this story, it's apparent this is Odysseus. And what does he do? He tells us what happened from the time he left Troy, the Trojan War. Okay, so there's been 9 years. We found him at the end of those 9 years. He's stuck with Calypso on the island, but that's not where he began. He ended there at towards the end. There were other things along the way which he had to undergo, and what are those? Well, the first one that he mentions is he encounters the lotus eaters. And if he stays with the lotus eaters, they're eating whatever it is. It's probably some sort of narcotic. And if you eat this, you're going to forget who you are, and you're not going to want to go home. So this is whoa, hold on. War veteran, traumatized. What are you going to do with your trauma? Anesthetize it. It's called drugs and alcohol. How many people are going to go that route? Many people deal with their trauma by trying to forget themselves, obliterate the memory by passing out, getting drugged up. Odysseus is not going to settle for that. In a sense, trauma comes with life, suffering comes with life. How do you deal with it? Odysseus is the role model for this. Note that he can't get where he wants to be without wisdom. He's not getting off the island. Even Odysseus can't get where he needs to. So he starts with the island of the lotus eaters. They could make him forget his way home. He decides he's not going to hang around there. As much as some of his crewmen want to do that, no, that's not going to help me. That would trap us, to use contemporary jargon, in a cycle of addiction, and that's dehumanizing me. I'm not going to be a man then anymore. Not going to do that. He then moves on in book 9 to the land of the Cyclops. Now, the Cyclops are in the same general vicinity as the Phaiakians, where he's telling the story. And the chief of them, his name is Polyphemus. And the Cyclops have one eye. Just one. And Polyphemus is the offspring of Poseidon. And we already know about Poseidon, the earth shaker. So this is just one aspect of the story, and it's a decisive one. Because this is the one that's going to cause him personally a great deal of suffering. The Cyclops are not social beings. They live on their own. This goes very much against the Greeks' understanding of human nature. The Greeks do not believe that you can be like Robinson Crusoe and live on your own. A solitary human existence is not a genuinely human existence. The worst thing imaginable for a Greek is to be sent into exile. Remember in The Dark Knight, the third installment, where it's death or exile? I'll choose exile, and you know what I'm talking about? What's the third one? With Bane and all that. Anyway, exile sounds great. Okay, death by exile, right? Well, they get to walk on the ice, and then they're going to plunge in. I mean, you're going to die or you're going to die. It's how are you going to die? That's not what it means for the Greeks. You're not going to be sent to your death, but you're going to be sent away from human beings, and you're going to be prey to the animals, but also you're going to be subject to men who are outside the law. And they're going to see you as prey. They're going to rob you, steal from you, do whatever they want with you, and there's going to be no justice. There's nothing to protect you. This is why a passport's a useful thing. If you don't have a passport, you have no identity, you have no nation that's protecting you, saying this person belongs to this country and has certain rights. If you're a stateless human being, you're in a bad place. This is why refugees are in difficulty. If they don't have a state behind them, or they even have to leave their home, their state, because of the oppression there, they go from a bad place to an equally bad place, or almost as bad, which is they have nobody there. If you're a foreigner and comes to Canada, you're easy prey. It's just there might be not as many predators here as there might be from where you came from, but still, you don't speak the language, you don't know the culture, you don't know the customs, you're in a different climate, they eat different food, and they regard you as an outsider. You look human, but you're pretty vulnerable. You depend on other people's hospitality and generosity, right? This is the way all of the Cyclops live. They live autonomously. They have no law, and they don't recognize the laws of hospitality either. And this is one of the things we saw already that was a possibility for the Greeks to imagine, and it's what Odysseus himself said when he came across Nausicaa. What sort of people are these? Are they civilized people, or are they barbarians? The barbarians won't recognize the rules of civility. If I'm with the barbarians, the gods help me because I'm in trouble. Because what will men not do to somebody who they don't recognize as a human being that deserves hospitality? They won't serve me up food. They might serve me as food. We're going to come to that, by the way. They might just eat me, cannibalize me. That's the Lacedaemonians, by the way. They will do that. They are man-eaters. They threaten to eat him. But here, Polyphemus will threaten that as well. Now, they have no ships. Therefore, they don't travel. They stick where they are. They stick to themselves. They have a ship is a symbol of trade, but also of art, or techne. It requires a certain standard of civilization to build a ship, and a desire to trade, and you get things that you don't have in your own country. You got citrus fruits and bananas in Canada. We don't grow citrus fruits and bananas in Canada if you like those things. You're not going to get them. And the list could go on and on. I mean, Canada is a very rich country in terms of its natural wealth, but there are many things we don't have we get through trade. Likewise, technological implements, laptops, computers, cell phones, whatever. These are the products of techne, and they come to us because we've got trade routes that bring them. So civilization comes from people working together. So, but the Cyclops have no ships, so they're living a green life, if you will, the environmentalist dream. They're not spewing carbon footprints. They're not expanding beyond their territory. But the view that Homer presents is that they live a life repugnant to the gods. And they're insolent. They don't care what the Olympian gods think. Actually, Polyphemus even says that. And they don't accept that there is a law of human nature. And if there is one, it doesn't apply to them. So they can do whatever they want with this visitor. Yes, I understand that the Olympian gods will punish those who don't show hospitality, but what do I care about the Olympian gods? And so he grabs Odysseus's shipmates and eats them, which is not only not hospitable, it's the antithesis of hospitality. Rather than feeding your guests, you feed on your guests. Now, this is where we see Odysseus's cunning. He asked them where their ships are, because he knew, they got here somehow. There's such a thing as ships. We just don't want to build them. We don't need. Why? Because they have physical strength. They don't need ships. They're strong enough physically to stand against any foe. Again, from the Greek vantage point, physical strength is valued, but it's not the only thing that's valued. Physical strength is valued, though. They have the Olympian Games, right? So being faster, stronger, all of those things. Very much valued. Of course, they give prizes, but they also give prizes in the arts and music, etc. And they value wisdom. No value on wisdom here whatsoever. So this is, again, the Cyclops represents a certain view of human nature that looks at nature one-eyed. We don't need to improve human nature or nature of creatures. We just need things to stay as they are. We're going to live off the land. That's it. Now, once Polyphemus traps them in his cave and he rolls a stone over the entrance, and it's so big that it would take many men to move it. No one man is going to be able to move this stone. He eats them and then drinks wine. He gets drunk, and he falls in front of the stone of the cave, and they can't move him. Even if they wanted to, he's too big to get by them. And they give him the wine to make him happy, but also to make him drunk. Okay, so at this point, what do you do? Well, the plan here, and he asks for, one final thing. He asks for Odysseus' name. And he doesn't tell him. Or that's not quite true. He does tell him. He tells him a lie. He tells him his name's nobody. This famous passage. Famous passage. I mean, Polyphemus is so dumb that he thinks that nobody is his name, right? First of all, I think, well, that's quite the name. Well, maybe in your language that means something different. Oh, if it's nobody, all right. And then they have a plan. What is the plan? Well, the plan is to take out Polyphemus. And how are they going to do that? They take one of the ship's masts and they fire it up to a point where it's flaming hot. And then they're going to charge with this thing over their shoulders, and they're going to stick it in his eye and blind him, which they do. And they drive it in. You can hear the hissing, and it's told in lurid detail. Read it for yourself in Book 9. I'm not going to read it here just for space of time, but it's the detail is gory, as you would expect. And he screams out in pain, of course. Now he has one eye, now he can't see at all. It's totally dependent on his physical strength. His physical strength is not going to do him any good. But they're still stuck in the cave. They're not getting out. But he has to go out, and he has to let his sheep go out, because the sheep are what produce the milk that allows him to live. So he's got to get them out. So what did they do? Well, they cling to the undersides of the sheep, and then they go out, and he pats the sheep as they go by, and they get out past him. And then as they get away, first when he is blinded by them, he cries out. And he cries out to the other Cyclops to come. And he says, nobody is trying to kill me. Help! Help, help, nobody is killing me. And the other Cyclops go, I guess Polyphemus has had too many to drink, And if nobody is killing you, then you don't really need help, and they go back to what they're doing. Right? So he's a way of cleverly tricking them. Now there's two sides to this. He gives them a name that will allow other people not to realize what's going on, but he also doesn't reveal his identity. And there's something very important being said here about names and identity here, which is consistent throughout the Odyssey. Your name is who you are. And this is part of what Odysseus has lost by not getting back home. His identity has been stolen from him by Calypso. Calypso offered him eternal physical bliss. That's not his identity. That's not enough of him. That's just the body of the man there. Well, he's more than that. He wanted his whole identity to be recovered, and he has not got there yet, and he's not going to get there without recovering everything, and that would mean getting back to his wife, having his son, having his kingdom, bringing in justice. All of those things are part of his identity, not just his name, but all the things that go with that name. And what sort of a name? It's the name that everybody else is so enamored with. They're telling stories about that man, and he knows that that man is him, and he's not. There's a contradiction between where he is right now and what they're saying about this great man Odysseus, because he's not so great. He's just like a beggar in another country. At any rate, he does the foolish thing at this point. He gets away, they get to the ship, and he says, you want to know what, Polyphemus? Whenever somebody asks you, because he's angry at this point at what he's done, at the injustice, he says, whenever somebody asks you who it was that blinded you, you tell them that it was Odysseus, sacker of cities, that did this to you. Huh? Like he's smack talk. He's taunting him. You're not going to hit me. And he picks up a stone, like an enormous stone, and almost sinks his ship. It's a good thing they were out of reach. But bigger problem, he didn't realize who Polyphemus was. Polyphemus had a father whose name is Poseidon, and now Poseidon is so outraged at the injustice done to his son, you're not getting back. That's how this all began. He acts out of character here, actually. This was very unwise. Yes?
So if Cyclops represent what humans are not to be looking at the worldview through one eye, right? What does Poseidon represent then in trying to get justice for his son and his son?
Well, he's the god, so I don't know. I mean, the different gods seem to, they don't really apply. They're not human examples.
Because the gods are supposed to be for hospitality and whatnot, right?
They are.
Right? But then
Yes.
by him defending his son, who represents the exact opposite, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, as far as the gods representing that, it seems to be Zeus that chiefly upholds those things. The others acknowledge it, but it's Zeus that more or less says, we're going to hold to this, because this is the way things are. And they all say, yeah, okay. But then, when somebody takes your food, you get angry and you ignore the rules. And this was what happened to the gods. If they get offended individually, they get outraged, and that's not fair. So, and I'm immortal, and I'm stronger, so I'm going to punch down, right? And I can get away with it. And then Zeus comes along and says, okay, all right, children, enough, and let's get back in line here. There are certain standards of decency. We got to go back to that. And there can be a fight, it can go on, but eventually he knocks them all back into shape. But they don't act justly just of their own accord. This is partly why the gods are so objectionable to the philosophers. These are bad. These are like bad children, basically. They're just immortal. So why would we revere them as gods then? Anyone who says that these are the gods is lying. They're not telling the truth. We're not denying that there are gods. We're saying that these aren't accurate. But he acts out of character. He is triumphalistic. He acts as if he's clear and dry when he is nowhere near home. So he's not there yet, and he acts as if he's won this great victory. That's not characteristic of Odysseus or of wisdom. The wise person holds their cards to their chest and doesn't tell what is going on there. Basically, being very tight-lipped. But he gets off the island. But now he's not getting back because Poseidon is, that ship where Odysseus and his crewmates are, they're not getting back. I'm not going to allow it. And they get put to different places. In Book 10, they are in the land of Aeolus. He, as the god, he has control of the winds. This is where the winds come, allegedly, from the cave of Aeolus. There's a bag of the winds. It's a floating island. It's right at the outset there. Book 10. We came next to the Aeolian island where Aeolus lived, Hippotas' son, beloved by the immortal gods, on a floating island, the whole enclosed by a rampart of bronze not to be broken, and the sheer of the cliff runs upward to it. And 12 children were born to him in his palace, 6 of them daughters and 6 sons in the pride of their youth. So he bestowed his daughters on his sons to be their consorts, and evermore, beside their dear father and gracious mother, these feast, and good things beyond number are set before them. And all their days the house fragrant with food echoes in the courtyard, but their nights they sleep each one by his modest wife, under coverlets and on bedsteads corded for bedding. So there is a bag of winds, and it's a sort of an isolated world. It's not healthy. There's a lot of discord going on there. It's not connected. It's a floating island. There's nothing stable here. It's static in the sense that no change comes here, but the island is not fixed. It moves around. It's not home. It's an isolated world. And Aeolus gives him this bag full of winds, and the winds get out of the bag. He can't control the chaos there. It's not a habitable place for Odysseus and his companions. And they move on. I mentioned the Las Trigones. This is Book 10 as well. Line 106 thereabouts. These are giants who threaten to eat them. If you want C.S. Lewis takes off on this in The Silver Chair. Giants, kids, taken from this, I'm pretty sure. They escape that. He moves on, and he moves on to Circe's Island. Note there's a series of episodes here. Circe's Island around, where is this going to be? Book 10, line 149, the halls of Circe. Circe is a bit like Calypso. She's a figure of lust. She's also a witch, which Calypso is not. And not only is she a figure of lust, she casts spell over men. She gives them a drink that turns them into swine. She unmans them. She makes them into beasts. By making them only care about the carnal pleasures there, she dehumanizes them, and they literally are turned into swine. She knocks them into their pens and shuts the gate on them. And they're wallowing around. And Hermes comes down. I'll read this. An encounter with Hermes, and started at 270. It's already in the middle of a conversation, but O glorious Odysseus, etc. But so he spoke, and I answered again in turn and said to him, Eurylochus, You may stay here eating and drinking, even where you are and beside the hollow black ship. Only I shall go, for there is strong compulsion upon me. So I spoke, and started up from the ship in the seashore. But as I went up through the lonely glens, and was coming near to the great house of Circe, because his men have gone ahead. They've had enough of being at sea. They want some real food and some real drink. And she offers them that, and they're turned into swine. Odysseus is outraged by this, and he's going to go take her on. So I've had enough of this. I'm going to go rescue my men. As he's on his way up there to the great house of Circe, skilled in medicines, there as I came up to the house, Hermes of the golden staff met me on my way, in the likeness of a young man, with beard new grown, which is the most graceful time of young manhood. He took me by the hand and spoke to me and named me. Also important, he actually was able to identify him. He didn't tell him his name. This is clearly a god. He named me, saying, "Where are you going, unhappy man, all alone through the hilltops, ignorant of the land bay? And your friends are here in Circe's place, in the shape of pigs, and holed up in the close pig pens. Do you come here meaning to set them free? I do not think you will get back yourself, but must stay here with the others. But see, I will find you a way out of your troubles and save you. Here, this is a good medicine. Take it and go into Circe's house. It will give you power against the day of trouble. And I will tell you all the malevolent guiles of Circe. She will make you a potion, put drugs in the food, but she will not, even so, be able to enchant you. For this good medicine which I give you now will prevent her. I will tell you the details of what to do. As soon as Circe with her long wand strikes you, then drawing from beside your thigh your sharp sword, rush forward against Circe as if you were raging to kill her, and she will be afraid and invite you to go to bed with her. Do not then resist and refuse the bed of the goddess, for she will set free your companions and care for you also. But bid her swear the great oath of the blessed gods that she has no other evil hurt that she is devising against you, so she will not make you weak and unmanned once you are naked. Who knows what that means? But anyway, she's going to swear an oath, and the gods abide by their oaths. Oath swearing is very important. She's going to have to swear an oath, and if she's going to do it, you're going to threaten her, but she will swear an oath, and then she will abide by the oath. And furthermore, she's going to tell you how to get home. And what she will then do is, what he pulls out is something that line 332, is that where it is? No. It's called the holy moly, by the way. Ever heard that phrase in English? Holy moly. That's the thing that he is given. I'm going to give you this potion thing. I'm going to give you this thing that'll help you escape from Circe. It's called holy moly. Nowadays, it's just sort of a funny phrase in English. Well, there, get out the holy moly. And she will lose her ferocity, and then he will go down. And he will go down to find his way home. Now, how is he going to do that? He is going to have to undertake one significant feature of epics, which is he's going to have to go down to the paths of the dead, the underworld, like Aragorn. He's going to go down to the underworld, where no man who is mortal comes back. Heroic undertaking. He's going to go down to the underworld. And I'll pick it up here, because this is Circe speaking. I'll pick it up at 5:01. Circe, who will be our guide on that journey? No one has ever yet in a black ship gone all the way to Hades. So I spoke, and she, shining among goddesses, answered, Son of Laertes and seed of Zeus, resourceful Odysseus, let no need for a guide on your ship trouble you. Only set up your mast pole and spread the white sails upon it. And sit still, and let the blast of the north wind carry you. But when you have crossed with your ship the stream of the ocean, you will find there a thickly wooded shore, and the groves of Persephone, and tall black poplars growing, with fruit-perishing willows. Then beach your ship on the shore of the deep eddying ocean, and yourself go forward into the moldering home of Hades. There, Pyriphlegethon and Cocytus, which is an off-break from the water of the Styx, flow into Acheron. These are all rivers in the underworld. The names are famous. They are named in subsequent literature. The Styx, the Acheron, the Phlegethon, the Cocytus, these are all identifiable rivers in the underworld. They're picked up by later poets, Romans as well. And there's a rock there, and the junction of two thunderous rivers. There, hero, you must go close in and do as I tell you. Dig a pit of about a cubit in each direction and pour it full of drink offerings for all the dead. First, honey mixed with milk, then a second pouring of sweet wine, and the third, water, and over all of them sprinkle white barley. And promise many times to the strengthless heads of the perished dead that, returning to Ithaca, you will slaughter a barren cow, your best, in your palace, and pile the pyre with treasures. And to Tiresias, I want you to remember this name. To Tiresias. This is who she wants him to see. Tiresias. Remember the name. To Tiresias apart, dedicate an all-black ram, the one conspicuous in all your sheep flocks. But when with your prayers you have entreated the glorious hordes of the dead, then sacrifice one ram and one black female, turning them towards Erebus, place in the underworld, identified later with hell. But yourself turn away from them and make for where the river runs, and there the numerous souls of the perished dead will come and gather about you. Then encourage your companions and tell them, taking the sheep that are lying there, etc. So here's what you're supposed to do. And so he goes down in book 11 to the land of the dead. And on the way, by the way, this is just an aside, I'm not going to spend any time on this. One of his companions dies falling off the rooftop of Circe. I guess before she could turn him into a swine, he had too much to drink, got up on the rooftop, I guess that's what you do, and he fell and broke his neck. His body is not buried. Because his body is not buried, he can't get down to the underworld, where all bodies go. And this is a sacrilege. He needs to be buried properly. He's going to have to find Elpenor first and bury him. Otherwise, he will be restless. He won't go where dead bodies go. Anyway, that's just an aside. Book 11. I have a few minutes left. Book 11 is the account of the underworld. And this identifies Odysseus as a sort of priestly character, a shamanistic hero in the native culture of this country and other tribes. They have a shaman. Do you know what a shaman is as a figure, as a religious figure? Sort of communes with the dead, tells them the will of the underworld and so forth. So there's a little bit of darkness here, I would say, more than a little bit. And Odysseus is this sort of figure by communing and bringing knowledge from the underworld, which is thought in the Greek and the Romans and in many cultures. The knowledge of the dead is more profound and a higher appeal than appealing by the gods. Now, once you've seen the gods of the Greeks, you can sort of understand why appealing to them isn't necessarily a stable thing. But if you're going to swear by death, which everybody is going to meet and is a very certain thing, maybe that has more. So when you swear by the dead, it's a very sacred oath. Christians are forbidden to do this, of course, but I'm talking about paganism here. He goes down into the underworld, and he is going to pass between the upper world and the lower world. We're going to see others will also go in the cycle of heroic epics, that the hero characteristically goes down into the underworld to get knowledge and then come up with it, that they would not have had by only mortal means. Now remember, at the beginning of the epic, he appealed to the muses to tell his story. This is a different sort of knowledge. It's more of a religious sort of knowledge. And she's supposed to go to Tiresias. Let me pick him up here. 137 is what I have in my notes. So Tiresias speaks here and I'll skip over that, but I'll pick it up at 137. So he spoke, but I in turn said to him in answer, all this, Tiresias, surely must be as the gods spun it. But come now, tell me this and give me an accurate answer. I see before me now the soul of my perished mother. But she sits beside the blood in silence and has not yet deigned to look directly at her own son and speak a word to me. So he sees the shade of his mother there. So this is the fate. This is what happens to human bodies after death in their understanding. They become shades. Shades are sort of, they look like the people that were there before, but they can't speak. They seem to have no spark in them either. They don't have any motivation. They're sort of, they look the way they did, but there's no life in them. And he sees his mother there. He says, she will not even look at me or speak a word. Tell me, Lord, what will make her know me and know my presence? So I spoke, and he at once said to me in answer, easily I will tell you and put it in your understanding. Any one of the perished dead you allow to come up to the blood will give you a true answer. But if you begrudge this to anyone, he will return to the place where he came from. So speaking, the soul of the dead Tiresias went back. So what are they going to do? You got to come forward and, yeah, Mom, you can drink the blood. And then she'll come forward, drink the blood, and then she'll speak to you. The blood has certain connotations. I mean, it's a bit sort of eerie, but blood connotes life. Right? You're going to have the life in you to be able to speak. Hence the meaning of blood, I guess. There's a sacrifice here. A life has been given so that you can have life. And she does. So speaking, the soul of the Lord Tiresias went back into the house of the Hades. So Tiresias is the guide that is going to tell him about the future. Lord Tiresias went back into the house of Hades once he had uttered his prophecies, while I waited steadily where I was standing until my mother came and drank the dark clouding blood, and at once she knew me. And full of lamentation, she spoke to me in winged words. My child, how did you come here beneath the fog and the darkness, and still alive? All this is hard for the living to look on, for in between lie the great rivers and terrible waters that flow, ocean first of all, which there is no means of crossing on foot, not unless one is a well-made ship. Are you come now to this place from Troy with your ship and your companions after wandering a long time? And have you not yet come to Ithaca and there seen your wife in your palace? So she spoke. And I, in turn, said to her in answer, Mother, a duty brought me here to the house of Hades. I had to consult the soul of Tiresias, the Theban, for I have not yet been near Achaean country, nor ever set foot on our land, but always suffering I have wandered since the time I first went along with the great Agamemnon to Ilion, land of good horses, and the battle against the Trojans. But come now, tell me this, and give me an accurate answer. What doom of death that lays men low has been your undoing? Was it a long sickness, or did Artemis of the arrows come upon you with her painless shafts and destroy you? And tell me of my father and son whom I left behind. Is my inheritance still with them, or does some other man hold them now and thinks I will come no more? Tell me about the wife I married, what she wants, what she is thinking, and whether she stays fast by my son and guards everything, or if she has married the best man among the Phaiakians. He wants to know, what am I going to face when I get home? Who's going to tell me this? He goes down and asks his mother, and the mother asks or answers him there. I'll skip over the answer. In the underworld, we get the sense of, wisdom being delivered, and more than wisdom, it's not wisdom, it's more insight into the future and the present. The underworld, they seem to know what's happened in the land of the mortals. You can consult with the dead. Forbidden in Scripture, by the way. Necromancy, consulting the dead. Why would you even think of doing it? Well, because there's a standard practice, actually, amongst the pagans to do exactly that. let me talk to my great-grandfather or whatever and call upon him to give me wisdom here. Don't do that. You know, the Witch of Endor type stuff. He will encounter all sorts of figures here. So he speaks to her. Who else will he see here? Well, he'll see Hercules being referred to. He will meet, let me go to this passage actually, because I think this is 450. These are well worth looking at. Actually, I need to look over this. Persephone, Aegisthus. There came the soul, so 387. There came the soul of Agamemnon, the son of Atreus, grieving, and the souls of the other men who had died with him and met their doom in the house of Aegisthus were gathered around him. He, that is Agamemnon, knew me at once, when he drank the dark blood and fell and threw himself into my arms, meaning so to embrace me. But there was no force there any longer, nor any juice left in his flexible limbs as there had been in the past. I broke into tears. So the shades have no substance. They can speak, but there's nothing there. And there will also be the gesture of him trying to embrace the shades 3 times and nothing. He does this with his mother. He does it with others as well. He tries to embrace them. There's no body there. There's a shadow that can speak, but no body. He wants to embrace. Not possible. What does Agamemnon say? Son of Atreus. Or no, he says to him, son of Atreus, most lordly and king of men, Agamemnon, what doom of death that lays men low has been your undoing? Was it with the ships, or did Poseidon, rousing a storm blast of battering winds that none could wish for, prove your undoing? Etc. And what does he say? Well, he tells the story that everyone else has already heard. Not in the ships, nor to Poseidon, but rather Aegisthus, 409, working out my death and destruction, invited me to his house and feasted me and killed me there, with the help of my sluttish wife, as one cuts down an ox at his manger. So I died a most painful death. And my other companions were killed around me without mercy, like pigs with shining tusks in the house of a man rich and very powerful for a wedding or a festival or a communal dinner. You have been present in your time at the slaughter of many men, killed singly or in the strong encounters of battle. But beyond all others, you would have been sorry at heart for this scene, how we lay sprawled by the mixing bowl and the loaded tables all over the palace, and the whole floor was steaming with blood. And most pitiful was the voice I heard of Priam's daughter, Cassandra, the prophetess, who had killed by treacherous Clytemnestra, this is his wife, over me. But I lifted my hands and with them beat on the ground as I died upon the sword. But the sluttish woman turned away from me and was so hard that her hands would not press shut my eyes and mouth, though I was going to Hades. So she didn't even show him the dignity of closing his eyes and closing his mouth. She just left him. Total disregard for her life. Murder of her lawful husband. So he tells about this. And she said, many of us died, he goes on 4:38, many of us died for the sake of Helen, and when you were far, Clytemnestra plotted treason against you, so I spoke. And then he warns him. So by this, do not be too easy, even with your wife, nor give her an entire account of all you are sure of. Tell her part of it, but let the rest be hidden in silence. And yet you, Odysseus, will never be murdered by your wife. The daughter of Icarius, circumspect Penelope, is all too virtuous, and her mind is stored with good thoughts. Ah, well, she was only a young wife when we left her and went off to the fighting, and she had an infant child then at her breast. That child now must sit with the men and be counted. Happy he, for his dear father will come back and see him, and he will fold his father in his arms as is right, etc. Okay, so he sees Agamemnon. Who else does he meet? Well, he meets Achilles, hero of the Iliad. Okay. Achilles lived life the way all Greeks wanted to live their life. He died famous. He had the choice, by the way. He could have lived a long life, died in his bed. Or he could have died as the most famous of all the Greeks, but die young. Your choice, Achilles. What do you want? Give me fame. That's what he wants, right? The Greeks love Achilles. He is the greatest of their heroes. Here he speaks to him. What happens? Line 478. This is Odysseus. Son of Peleus, far the greatest of the Achaeans. Achilles. I came for the need to consult Tiresias, if he might tell me some plan by which I might come back to rocky Ithaca, for I have not yet been near Achaean country, nor ever set foot on my land, but always I have troubles. Achilles, no man before has been more blessed than you, nor ever will be. Before, when you were alive, we Argives honored you as we did the gods. And now, in this place, you have great authority over the dead. Do not grieve, even in death, Achilles. So I spoke. And he, in turn, said to me in answer, here's the shocker. O shining Odysseus, never try to console me for dying. I would rather follow the plow as thrall, a slave, to another man, one with no land allotted him, and not much to live on, than be a king over all the perished dead. But come now, tell me anything you've heard of my proud son, whether or not he went along to war to fight as a champion, or tell me anything you've heard about stately Peleus, whether he still keeps his position amongst the Myrmidon hordes, or whether in Hellas and Phthia they have diminished his state because old age constrains his hands and feet. So what does he say? I would rather have died or lived a long life up there than go down here and be king of the dead, as you call me. So it's an extraordinary statement, because the whole of the Greek life is there for the sake of honor and glory. And yet he dies a life of honor and glory. He's praised for it, but he says it's a miserable place down here. You don't want to be here. You want to stay away from here as long as you possibly can. And what do I care about the honor and glory? Be more interested in the living. So this is not a place. Think about the portrait of life after death, if that's the case. This is the worst life on earth is better than the best life down here. This is what awaits every man. Directly contradicts their sense of, it shows the futility of the life. No matter what they do, they're going to die, and their life, and they will experience a terrible afterlife. And the best they can hope for is a good reputation like Achilles has, but it's no consolation to Achilles. He's not happy with the fact that he's famous. It does sort of undercut it. The gospel says something very different. Right? If you die having faith in Christ, though you die, you will live, because your faith is lived. Your faith lays hold to the risen Son of God, and you will live eternally, and there'll be no more tears or dying or cry or suffering or pain. Those will be removed. That's not how it's portrayed here. It's a very different view of what happens after life, but they do have a sense that there is an afterlife in both cases, right? He loses all sense of pleasure. This is the greatest of them. Think of what the terror of death then is for the Greeks, and then think about how the Greeks lived their life, refusing to bow to the Persians, let's say in the Battle of the 300 and so forth. Like, this is literally a historical account. A question, comment?
Yeah, did the Greeks have a underworld or afterlife paradise?
The Elysian Fields, no. This develops in the Roman account. And so we'll come and look at that, because it's a feature of epics, is that there comes an expansion. In the Roman rendering, there is a differentiation. The good guys go a little bit different place than the bad guys. So there's a little bit of justice in the life after. It's still pretty shadowy, but at least it's the Elysian Fields, yeah? The Champs-Élysées. If you go to France and Paris, the Champs-Élysées, that's the Elysian Fields. It's taken from Roman mythology. It's a little bit better. It's still shadowy. But there's a justice there. Yes, you will get punished for bad deeds in the underworld. You don't really get the same sense of that here. They're all going down to the underworld. They're all in the same place, whether good or bad. That's the Greek sense of it. Romans have a more established sense of justice in what comes after death. Not so much here. And then there's a prophecy at the end, which is at the end of his days, Odysseus will plant an oar at the earth where no one has ever heard of ships, and that will mark the end of his voyage. He's not going to use it anymore. It's planted there. That's the end. Now that will take place after he comes home. At the end of his days, it'll be his last voyage. He will not live to be an old man in Ithaca. He comes home, meets his wife, sees his son, and then a bit later on, he's going to have to go on yet one last voyage. So the return to Ithaca is not the end of his story. We'll come to that when we come to it, but it's extraordinary. Goes to the underworld, comes out of it. And now he's ready to go back, and then he comes back, having told all this. So he meets Heracles, whatever. Now he comes back and will go on and speak. Let me, final two, I've got 2 minutes. He will meet the Sirens, the Scylla and Charybdis. This is literally the phrase for the rock and a hard place, right? Caught between a rock and a hard. This is Scylla and Charybdis. Which one's worse than the other? Well, one is like a tidal pool, pulls you down. The other is this beast that grabs people and eats them. Would you rather go near her or near her? Because you're enough to go near one of them. He chooses to go near the one that grabs men and eats them, and he loses some of his companions, but they don't all die. Two very bad options. Which one's worse? Well, the one where everyone goes down. That's the one that's worse. Still, terrible. So Circe gives them the instructions how to go home. One last word, she says, whatever you do, do not eat the cattle of Helios, the sun god, or you will not get home. Don't do that. The sirens, by the way, sing with a beautiful voice. And he says, I want to hear that song. But if I hear it, I'm going to go towards the song because of the desire in me. But I want to hear beauty. I want to hear that beauty. And so he tells his companions to block their ears with wax, and he's going to go without it, but you have to strap me to the mast. Whatever I do, whatever I say to you, however don't let me go from the mast. And then, of course, when he hears it, he wants them to, let me out, let me out. Nope, won't do it. But he hears that. He longs for me, it's a longing for heaven. There's a beauty there which is so compelling, he longs to hear it. Now, for men, it's treacherous. But it's not that he doesn't, it's a lust, but now it's not a lust of the flesh, it's more a desire of the heart. That's what he hears in the siren song. In this case, it's fatal. But don't go to the god, the Helios, and eat his cows, whatever you do, or you're not getting back. Of course, his men ignore him, run off, eat the cows. They're all dead. All dead. They all die. He loses all of his men. Having brought them thus far, he loses them all. And he ends up going to Calypso's island, and that's where we pick it up after that in book 13. Right, so that's the whole story. There's other episodes in there, but more or less that's it. And that's why he's left alone. He had managed to get them all to that point, but his men disobeyed him. And so he is now there on the island of Calypso until he was freed by Hermes. And now, with that, then the Phaiakians are going to say, oh, you're Odysseus. This is great. We're going to help you get home. We'll pick that up next time.